Steam rises from the pan, twisting in the humid air of Guam. 1945. The camp is quiet, except for the rhythmic hiss of oil. Inside the mess tent, an American soldier turns slices of mushrooms over the flame, each one golden and glistening. The smell spreads beyond the kitchen walls, earthy, rich, and strangely comforting. It cuts through the scent of dust and sweat that has clung to the prisoners for months. At the far end of the table, Captain Hiroshi Tanaka of the Imperial Japanese Navy watches, his uniform still pressed, his chin lifted with pride. The corners of his lips curl upward in disdain. They fry everything. He mutters to his men, "No spirit, only stomach." The other prisoners laugh softly, brittle laughter that hides exhaustion. For them, oil is extravagance. Indulgence, a symbol of weakness in a world that glorifies restraint. The Americans say nothing. Private Joe Miller, 24 years old, born on a farm in Ohio, continues to work. He drains the mushrooms, the oil dripping slowly into the tray, the sound like a clock counting seconds. Around him, the air thickens with the smell of salt, wheat flour, and heat. A soldier wipes sweat from his neck, the movement slow, deliberate. Outside, sunlight glints on barbed wire. Inside, every sense collides: smell, sound, sight, even taste imagined. It is not just food cooking, but worlds meeting in silence. The proud men who once shouted "Tenno Heika Banzai" now watch a frying pan as if it were an enemy. Steam rolls again, blurring faces in uniforms. Pride battles hunger in the heavy air. The oil pops once more, loud as a gunshot. Somewhere beyond the fence, the Pacific hums with life. Inside this cage of heat and laughter, something unseen begins to shift the first crack in the armor of arrogance. A whisper of humanity rising through the smoke. If you value stories like this, don't forget to like and subscribe. It helps preserve forgotten chapters of history. Share your location and local time in the comments below. The midday sun bears down on the camp, flattening every sound. Flies hover over empty bowls, and the air tastes of dust and iron. The Japanese prisoners sit in rows on the ground, their backs straight, their knees folded. Uniforms still buttoned, though sweat runs freely. Hunger makes their hands tremble, but discipline forbids movement. For them, to reach for American food is not sustenance, it is surrender. The Americans eat nearby, their laughter carried by the heat. The smell of fried mushrooms drifts again, thicker now, mixed with onions and butter. A few prisoners glance sideways, quick, ashamed of their own curiosity. Captain Tanaka clenches his jaw. His body is rigid, but his stomach betrays him with a quiet growl. He lowers his head slightly, pretending to fix his sleeve. A Japanese sergeant whispers, "They eat like this every day." No one answers. The question itself feels dangerous, as if admitting astonishment could wound their pride further. Joe Miller wipes his hands on his apron. His movements are unhurried, steady. He sets a small tray on the ground near the fence, just a few pieces left over. Nothing formal, no invitation, no words, only the sound of oil cooling, the hiss fading into silence. The wind changes. The aroma carries over the wire like a taunt and a mercy all at once, for the first time. The proud men of the Emperor hesitate. The world they believed in discipline, spirit. Sacrifice collides with the truth that hunger recognizes no flag. Tanaka looks up. The sun blinds him for a moment. Sweat rolls down his temple. The soldier beside him finally breaks and murmurs, "Even gods must eat." The captain doesn't reply, but his eyes flicker toward the tray. In that brief silence, the war within each man becomes louder than the war outside. Their stomachs ache, but something deeper begins to tremble the foundation of their faith in superiority. The belief that suffering itself is virtue. The camp remains still. The Americans do not look back. The smell of mushrooms hovers, patient, almost gentle. The narrator's words from an old diary found years later would describe it perfectly. Hunger was the last enemy that made us human again. The audience can almost hear it, pride cracking like thin glass beneath the weight of need. Night falls slowly over Guam. The air cools, but the scent of oil and mushrooms lingers like memory in the barracks. A young private named Kenji Morita sits alone on his cot, his stomach tight, his thoughts restless. The laughter from the mess hall still echoes faintly through the wooden walls. He closes his eyes and breathes in the fading aroma drifting across the camp, and suddenly, the years collapse. He is 16 again. In Hokkaido, the forest smells of wet leaves and cedar. His mother bends near the fire pit, frying mushrooms gathered after rain. She hums softly, the tune barely audible. He remembers the sound of oil popping in the pan, how the family would wait quietly, grateful for that single meal after days of scarcity. The same sound now returns to him, but distorted by distance and war. Back in the camp, a droplet of oil falls onto the stove, and the noise snaps him back to reality. His hands tighten into fists. The sound that once meant home now comes from the hands of an enemy. He feels shame burning behind his eyes. How could something so familiar, so innocent, now belong to those who destroyed his empire? Outside, American soldiers stack supplies boxes marked U.S. Army Quartermaster Corps. Inside them, flour, oil, salt, and tins of dried mushrooms from California. Over 250 tons of rations arrive every month to feed both guards and prisoners. A miracle of logistics that no one in Tokyo had ever imagined possible. While Japanese soldiers had marched barefoot through Burma, the Americans were shipping vegetables across oceans. Kenji lies back, staring at the ceiling. The wind rattles the tin roof. From somewhere nearby comes a faint drip of oil cooling in the pan. He imagines his mother again, her hands gentle as she turned the mushrooms, her voice saying softly, "Eat while it's warm, Kenji." For the first time since capture, he feels tears on his face, not for defeat, but for the distance between who he was and who he has become. In that small moment, warmth becomes memory, and memory becomes forgiveness. The line between enemy and home blurs in the steam of a forgotten recipe. The morning begins with the rattle of pans. Joe Miller stands at the stove again, his sleeves rolled high, the air around him heavy with smoke and the steady rhythm of work. He isn't thinking about war. He isn't thinking about orders. He's thinking about home, about his mother's kitchen in Ohio. The wooden floor creaking beneath her boots, the smell of cornmeal and mushrooms every harvest season. Joe never meant to be a cook. Before the draft, he was a farmer, waking up to frost and feeding cattle before dawn. When he enlisted, the Army assigned him to the kitchen because he handled food better than rifles. He accepted it without question. In this camp, where men spoke different languages and carried invisible wounds, his job was simple: make something warm, something human. The guards call him Mushroom Joe. Every morning he fries another batch, partly for the Americans, partly for anyone who's hungry enough to forget sides. He knows the prisoners mock him. He sees the way they glance and whisper, but he keeps cooking, the grease popping like faint applause in the quiet. He sets a plate near the fence again, not out of pity, just habit. On one side stand soldiers of the victors, on the other, men who had sworn never to yield. Joe looks up once, his face lined with fatigue and dust. "No need to like it," he says softly, "just stay warm." Then he walks away. The prisoners don't answer, yet the words settle like seeds. That night, someone in the barracks murmurs the sentence again, unsure whether to sneer or to repeat it with respect. "Stay warm." The phrase spreads quietly among them, no longer an order, but a reminder of something lost, the gentleness of normal life, the right to eat without hatred. A diary later found in the ruins of the camp in 1946 contained a note in broken English: "The man who cooks does not hate." No one knew who wrote it, but historians would later say that those lines, scrawled on thin paper, captured the unseen side of captivity better than any report. As the last light of the day sinks behind the camp fences, the smell of fried mushrooms hangs in the air like a hymn simple, unspoken, and deeply human. The next morning, the sun rises pale and colorless. Dew glistens on the barbed wire, and the camp is still, except for the faint hum of a stove warming up. The prisoners form their usual lines, motionless and distant. But today, something changes. An American guard opens the gate for work detail, and as the line moves, Captain Hiroshi Tanaka slows his step. On the mess table sits a plate of fried mushrooms, left unattended. The oil has cooled, but the golden surface still shines. He stares at it, his breath shallow. Pride tells him to keep walking. Hunger whispers louder. He hesitates, then reaches out. His fingers tremble slightly, The others watch, unblinking. He picks one piece up between thumb and forefinger, its warmth fading, but still there, for a heartbeat. Silence covers the camp. Then a bite, a crisp crack. The sound is small, but echoes like thunder inside him. The flavor spreads: oil, salt, a trace of butter, then something deeper. He feels it travel down his throat, melting into the hollow of his chest. For the first time in years, he tastes something that isn't rationed, forced, or meant to prove loyalty. He chews slowly, eyes half closed. "It's warm," he murmurs, almost to himself. The soldiers around him stare in disbelief. One whispers, "Captain," but Tanaka doesn't respond. The officer who once mocked American food now holds his silence like confession. Across the yard, Joe Miller catches the moment from a distance. He doesn't smile, doesn't speak. He just keeps working the next batch, as if nothing has changed, but everything has. A young prisoner near Tanaka copies him hesitantly, taking one bite, then another, soon. Laughter soft, uncertain, breaks the air. It's not joy yet, but it's no longer scorn. The boundaries begin to dissolve, not in speeches or peace treaties, but in the shared act of eating. Later, in his hidden notebook, Tanaka will write, "We laughed once, then we ate. The warmth was more powerful than the empire." To those watching today, what do you think breaks pride first? Hunger, kindness, or the taste of something familiar from an unexpected hand? Days pass. The rhythm of the camp changes in ways no one announces. The mornings still begin with roll call. The guards still check the fences, but the silence that once filled the barracks has softened. The men who used to mock the Americans now whisper about the food instead. Every afternoon, when the smell of frying drifts across the yard, a few step closer to the mess tent without realizing it. Captain Tanaka no longer hides his gaze. He watches Joe Miller cook with quiet interest. Once, he might have dismissed the American as a simple laborer. Now he studies every movement, the patience in turning the pan, the way the soldier checks the flame as if tending something sacred. It's a language beyond pride, a ritual that belongs to anyone who's ever been human enough to want warmth. In the evenings, the prisoners sit in clusters, talking softly. They no longer speak of victory or death. Instead, they argue over how the mushrooms are seasoned, or whether they might taste better with rice. Some even laugh. The guards notice, but do nothing. Perhaps they understand that this laughter carries no threat, only release. When letters from home arrive, the tone has changed too. One prisoner, Private Morita, writes to his brother, "They feed us food that tastes like forgiveness. I don't know what to do with it." The letter never reaches Japan. It's confiscated, translated, and filed away. But decades later, historians would quote that single line as the truest reflection of what happened behind the fences. One night, as the wind moves through the palm trees, Tanaka walks past the stove and pauses. Joe looks up briefly. The officer bows, a motion so small it could be missed. Joe returns the nod, then flips another mushroom, letting the oil hiss its steady reply. The camp sleeps easier that night. The Americans don't cheer, the Japanese don't surrender. But for a few brief hours, no one feels like an enemy. To you watching now, if compassion can be shown through something as simple as a meal, could every war begin to end in a kitchen rather than a battlefield? By early 1946, the war is long over, but the camp still hums with routine. The repatriation ships are preparing to depart, carrying thousands of prisoners back to a Japan they no longer recognize. The nights are quieter now. The shouting has stopped, replaced by the slow packing of meager belongings, folded letters, scraps of paper, tiny sketches of faces remembered. Joe Miller rises early on the last morning. The stove is old, blackened from months of work. He lights it one final time. The pan warms slowly, the oil turning clear and bright under the flame. He empties the last tin of dried mushrooms. The supply truck from California will not come again. The scent fills the mess tent, the same comforting smell that once divided the camp and then bound it together. Outside, the prisoners line up for departure. Among them, Captain Tanaka stands straighter than before, thinner, older, but with eyes less burdened by pride. When the guard calls his name, he steps forward, then pauses. He turns back toward the tent. Joe sees him through the haze of steam. For a brief moment, their eyes meet. Tanaka walks closer, extending both hands slightly. Joe hesitates, then sets down the spatula and offers the plate one final serving, edges crisp, oil still whispering. Tanaka bows deeply before taking it. He eats one piece, then another, chewing with quiet reverence. Around them, the camp seems to hold its breath. "Thank you," he says in halting English. Joe only nods. No flags, no speeches, no forgiveness, declared just the shared warmth of food between men who once swore to kill each other. That afternoon, the ships leave Guam. Smoke trails across the horizon. The mess tent is empty now, the stove silent. But in one of the prisoner notebooks later found in Tokyo, a single sentence is written: "The last thing I tasted of America was warmth, 10 years later." In 1956, an old man sits in a small restaurant in Tokyo, turning mushrooms in a pan. His hands are slower now, but steady. The radio hums softly. "We'll meet again." Steam rises, golden in the evening light. He takes a bite, closes his eyes, and smiles faintly. Some battles end in fire, others end in warmth. Years later, when historians studied the diaries and letters from the Guam internment camp, they found no mention of politics, no grand reflections about victory or defeat. What they found instead were fragments: the smell of oil, the sound of laughter after months of silence, and the taste of mushrooms shared between enemies. Small details, almost invisible, yet powerful enough to outlast uniforms, slogans, and the heavy silence of surrender. The Japanese prisoners who once scoffed at fried food returned home thinner, quieter, but changed in ways they couldn't easily explain. Some went back to their families, rebuilt lives in small towns, and raised children who never knew hunger. A few kept cooking, their hands instinctively repeating the gestures they learned not from comrades, but from their captors. They carried those moments with them, the kindness of a soldier who said, "Just stay warm," and the first bite that didn't taste like pride or fear, but humanity. Joe Miller never spoke of the war again. He went back to Ohio, reopened his family farm, and cooked mushrooms every Sunday. When asked why, he said it reminded him that even in war, something simple could still hold decency. His children grew up never hearing of Guam, yet they always remembered that their father believed a warm meal could change a man more than any bullet. Somewhere in Tokyo, Captain Tanaka grew old beside the same stove he once despised. Neighbors said he cooked for children who had no parents, always serving mushrooms first. They thought it was just habit. Only he knew that each meal was an offering, a quiet memorial to the day pride died and warmth survived. In the end, wars may begin with weapons and end with treaties, but peace is born in moments like these when a man tastes kindness and finds himself changed.